Ryan, that might be a first, seeing someone on a Zoom call with a mask on. That might be a first for me.
Who is that, Brian?
Brian Estella, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Gary.
Brian must be at work.
Must be, yes. Kurt, good to see you. Miss Sue Ward. Hello. If you haven't guessed by now, I'm greeter.
Everybody send Vlad a little thank you note for being a greeter.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Seriously, that would be great if, like, you know, 4 or 5 dozen thank you notes showed up at Vlad's office. Wouldn't that be fun?
Now, don't be giving any ideas, James.
Yeah.
As long as they have a check in them.
Right, there you go. See, John's, I knew I liked John.
SCS.
There you go. A great nonprofit. Hope everybody's doing well today. Beautiful Monday morning. Now Monday noon.
Look at that sunshine.
Yes, glorious day out there.
Now Monday noon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Walter Prediger said, thank you, Vlad.
Wonderful, thank you.
Well, Adeline's got that bell up.
Yes.
That's you know, the great original subtle hint. Everybody do remember the Zoom controls at the top of the top right hand side of the screen, where you can choose to focus in on the speaker and tune everybody else out if you so choose. The beautiful thing about that is that nobody knows if you tuned everyone out. So just keep those Zoom controls in mind. But it's a beautiful Monday. It's still hot out there. I hope you are staying cool. We're going to open our meeting. Go ahead and ring the bell, Adeline, if you could. Thank you so much. Welcome, Rotary Club of Harrisburg. We'll open our meeting today with Vlad doing an invocation for us wherever he disappeared to. There you are.
I'm right here. Amen. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are thankful, Lord, for this day that you have given us. Your word reminds us that we are not to care for tomorrow has enough care of its own. But we're here today and we want to say thank you for this day that you have made. We will rejoice and be glad in it, for its blessings, for its opportunities, its challenges. May we appreciate and use each day that comes to us. We pray for strength and guidance for each day as it comes, for each day's duties, for each day's problems. May we be challenged to give our best always, and may we be assured of your presence with us now and forevermore. And it's in your precious name that we do pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Vlad. Thank you, Vlad. And on tap for our song, we've got a special treat today.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking that endless highway, I saw above me This land is my land, from California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of diamond deserts. And all around me, a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, to the Redwood Forest and the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As the sun was setting and I was strolling, the wheat fields waving and the dust clouds growing, a voice was chanting as the fog was lifted. Oh, this land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Islands, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me. Oh, this land was made for you and me.
Let's give it up for our very own Nate Hartwig. Good job, Nate. Now, we found out that Nate could sing by looking at his hobbies and interests in the Rotary roster. So if you haven't updated your own hobbies and interests, make sure you do that. Look at the fascinating things that you learn about people by looking at their hobbies and interests. So great job, Nate. We appreciate you doing that, and maybe we'll get you to do that again at some point in the future. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the Rotary four-way test of all the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Let's make sure we keep the four-way test front and center in everything we do. A few quick announcements for you today. I want to do a real thank you again to our corporate members, but a real special shout out to UPMC for sponsoring today's speaker. We appreciate your support. It helps to make possible the many humanitarian projects that we work on throughout the course of the year. Lunch money today is donated to the YWCA. If your lunch money is not included in your dues, or if you'd like to make an additional donation, then go to ywcahbg.org/donate. And, you know, again, the reason we do this is if we're not eating lunch, there are people in our world today, especially who are really hurting for food and some of the other things that go along with a COVID-19 world. So we're working at supporting our local community in that way. Two things are happening tonight. Well, there's probably more than two things, but two things I'd like to highlight. One is District 7390 membership development presentation will be online. You can see the Zoom meeting link there. And if you're not sure or you can't find that on your own and you'd like to attend that meeting, send Adeline a note. The second thing that's happening this evening is that we are doing a service event, again, helping the Central Pennsylvania Food Bank to pack boxes of food. Right now, there are 18 people signed up, so we're looking forward to having a great group of folks there. Now, we've said this before, but I'll highlight it here again today. When you come out to that service event, make sure that you are wearing your Rotary merch, your Rotary swag. And Kurt, where's Kurt Stutzman? Do you want to stand there, Kurt? Or can everyone see Kurt and the shirt that he's wearing? Rotarian in service. Right, so the current version of those shirts is blue. If you don't have one, I'll be bringing a box of t-shirts along this evening, and we'll try to make sure that everyone is suited up in a Rotary t-shirt. If you're not able to make it, or if you'd like to make a donation, head out to the centralpennsylvaniafoodbank.org, as noted there, and click on the Give Now button. Rotary Means Business is a great way to connect, make business connections in Rotary. And there is a Rotary Means Business event coming up on August the 20th. See the link there. And if you're not sure about how to find a Rotary Means Business event, connect up with Scott Stevens. And we also have a link on the Rotary Club of Harrisburg website. There is a social event coming up at the West Shore Country Club. That's on August 26th from 5 to 7. So put that on your calendar. And we look forward to seeing you there. I wasn't sure if Brian Jones was going to be on the meeting today. I don't see him, but Brian Jones actually ended up with a mug that looks like this one. And he got that mug because he was sharing the Rotary story. There are a couple of ways that you can win a mug like this one by sharing the Rotary story. Each week we post Rotary Club of Harrisburg stories to social media. When you see that story appear on Facebook or LinkedIn, we appreciate the likes, we appreciate the comments, but don't forget to share the story. When you hit the share button, include hashtag Rotary Club 23 in your post. At the end of the month, we will sit down and count the number of folks who have shared the story. If you have 3 or more shares, you'll go into a group of people, and the highest number of people sharing stories will get Rotary mug and possibly some other Rotary merch. A second way that you can share the story of Rotary is to forward an email, things like the Rotary Roundup, which you do read from top to bottom, right? And when you do that, make sure you copy it to stories@hbgrotary.org. Well, that was a veritable list of announcements. I'm excited to have a committee report today on our district grant project. Sheldon Jones is someone that I met last year, and he is working with our very own Steve Swartz to do a project called Joy to the Burg. And Sheldon is actually an honorary member of the Rotary Club of Harrisburg, wherever he happens to be. Sheldon, are you there?
I'm here and ready.
All right, take it away for a few minutes and tell us about yourself and Joy to the Burg.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for making me an honorary member. And now that you've asked me to explain some things about myself, I'm glad I'm doing this after you've already made me an honorary member, because I'm not sure that would happen. I'm just kidding. Again, my name is Sheldon Jones. I was born and raised in Independence, Missouri. I've been married to my wife, Shelley, for 43 years. I worked in the public relations and corporate communications world for over 40 years. I am retired from Novartis, the big Swiss pharmaceutical company, and I retired as the global head of corporate communications for them. And our recent move about 3 years ago to Harrisburg to be closer to some granddaughters was our 24th move in our 43 years of marriage. I'm expecting everyone saying, wow. Next slide, please. But this is, for me, yeah, this is what it really is all about. We have Shelley, my wife and I have 3 grandsons, 3 daughter-in-laws, 1 grandson, 3 granddaughters, 1 dog, and 3 granddogs. And one of them is here with us today, so you might get to meet him through his barking. Next slide, please. So what am I up to now? After I retired in 2012, I started a consulting business and was quite busy for a few years. But then I picked up the guitar again and formed a band called Loco Lobo. We wrote some songs and released an album. And I enjoy doing that. But what I'm really involved in today is the Joy to the Burg project. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about it. Next slide, please. We started Joy to the Burg last year, and we wanted to get musicians, local musicians involved by recording a Christmas song, and we put it on an album and sold the album and held a concert. Next slide. So again, we initiated the project just last year. We had 14 bands, musicians on the album. We sold over 1,200 albums. We had 9 of the bands perform, including James and his family. And we had this at the concert at the Rose Lerman Auditorium. We had over 300 people attending. Next slide, please. We raised, through ticket sales and album sales, we raised almost $24,000. And this money, all the proceeds, went to the homeless ministries of Christian Churches United. We had also raised donations in addition to the sales to cover all of the expenses, the recording studios, the venue rentals, all of that was paid for. So 100% of the nearly 24,000 went directly to the homeless. The proceeds made it possible to establish a new winter walk-in shelter for women, opening the week of Christmas. And that was a special treat that we got to be so active in that. Next slide. In 2020, we're having the program again. And we have 18 very enthused musicians or bands already signed up. The album is being recorded right now, and it will have a November release. We had planned another live concert at Rose Lerman, had it reserved for December 13th, but as you know, HAC has closed until January. So we're looking now at making a video of the musicians who would have performed in the concert and stream the concert. We're working out those details. Next slide. So the Joy to the Burg, I mentioned 18 bands, musicians have signed up. Here's a list of them. You can look through those. You'll notice that the goods there, No Last Call, so Ted and his group are going to perform. Down at the bottom, Loco Lobo, that's my band. Next slide. So why is this so vital? These are challenging times, especially for the vulnerable populations. Many people have lost their jobs. We have a lot of folks just really suffering. And we thought that it was, even though it's challenging to put this together, we thought this would be a bit of a breath of fresh air, some hope. And the album sales, the musicians who have had a rough year themselves are so excited to do this, and we're very grateful. And I just really can't explain how nice it is to see the excitement among the musicians. People are already out in the looking to get the recordings done. And let's move on to the next slide, please. We've also recruited some sponsors, and you'll notice that the Rudolph sponsor, the top sponsorship, the Rotary Club, you folks have put up $5,000 for that. We also have McNeese doing the legal fees, which is significant because of all the copyright issues and contractual things that are involved. And other sponsors, the Lair Fund, Select Medical Corporation, Highmark, LB Smith Estate Foundation. And I just want to add that we are looking for more sponsorship and donations, and we would love to hear from anyone who has any ideas. Next slide, please. So I just want to end by, again, thanking Rotary for the donation and the commitment to the support of this project. And I want to thank James for making this happen. And I also want to thank him for his wonderful, enjoyable dobro music. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sheldon.
Did I stay under my 5 minutes?
You were in good shape there. And
Good.
you know, now that you've mentioned two important things, you mentioned No Last Call and Ted Reese, and you also mentioned Hack. So I think we'll make you a full member now instead of an honorary member. But it's good to have you here working with us, and we appreciate all that you're doing to help out in the area of homeless initiatives here in Harrisburg.
Thank you.
Well, we've got, you know, a good team of people that work hard each week, each month to line up high quality programming and just great speakers for us in our club meetings. And I want to ask John Hickey today if he could take a few minutes and introduce our speaker today. John?
Thanks, James. I hopefully won't need a few minutes. I will say, you know, UPMC, we're very lucky to be an IDFS, an integrated delivery and finance system, and that allows me to work on the health insurance side of the house, but have access to amazing resources on the clinical side, like John Goldman. John is our Vice President of Infectious Disease locally at UPMC Pinnacle. He is board certified by the American Board of Internal Medicine, Infectious Disease, and he earned his medical degree at the very rigorous University of Chicago. He completed his residency and fellowship at the New England Medical Center for Infectious Diseases. I've heard him speak on this subject a few times. He's really been a stalwart for us, our go-to person. He's spoken on the radio at many various venues, really bringing this difficult subject to a level, an understandable level, and helping us understand what's going on in our community. So I really appreciate John coming out today.
Right. All right, thank you very much for that kind introduction. So I'm going to talk a little bit about COVID-19. We'll talk first of all about what it is, its epidemiology, its clinical course, a little bit about testing, a little bit about treatment, and a little bit about prevention. I'm going to make the case that this is very widespread. I'm going to make the case that this is clearly worse than being just the flu. And I'm also going to make the case that we're making progress in both treatment and prevention. Next slide, please. So this is a novel coronavirus. This is the same kind of virus that causes the common cold. It is similar to other coronaviruses that are found in bats. It is structurally related to a couple of other severe coronaviruses. The SARS, the severe adult respiratory distress syndrome, and the Middle Eastern coronavirus. The difference between this coronavirus and the others is the others have not worked transmitted widely. SARS caused disease in China, was spread to Canada, and then in fact just disappeared. The Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, which is probably a coronavirus from camels, has been intermittently in the Middle East. We've seen very few cases in this country. This pandemic, this virus first appeared on this earth in December of last year. It started in Wuhan, China, probably through infection of unidentified species in the live animal markets, and then spread to humans through contact in those markets. The difference between this and other coronaviruses is that it easily spreads person to person. So for example, you've heard a lot about bird flu, and bird flu periodically appears, especially in Asia, typically, and it has about a 50% mortality. It's much more lethal than coronavirus. On the other hand, it typically goes from birds to people and just stops there. At most, it goes to a family member, but it doesn't go person to person. This virus goes person to person easily. As we'll talk about in a little bit, it's probably a little more infectious than the flu, and as a result, has spread like the flu in what has turned into a global pandemic. Next slide, please. So far, there have been about 20 million confirmed cases. There have been just shy, about 750,000 deaths worldwide. In the United States, we've just passed 5 million confirmed cases. Now, most people think that for every confirmed case, there probably are 10 cases. So we probably have had about 50 million people in the population infected. We've had 160,000 deaths. And in fact, some of the forecasts, we're getting about 1,000 deaths a day. So some of the forecasts have been, by the time December rolls around, will be up into the 300,000 range. In Pennsylvania, we've had about 114,000 cases and about 7,000 deaths. Next slide, please. And what we've really seen has been that we had an initial burst of cases in September. We did lockdown. We got up to about 30,000 a day. With lockdown, we got probably closer to 20, 25. We opened the country back up. We got up as high as 70,000 new cases a day. And I think now that people saw all the disease, quite frankly, people got scared. They're getting better with social distancing. They're getting better with masks. Since we've seen a decrease now to about 50,000 cases a day. With 50,000 cases a day, we're probably seeing really 500,000 a day. So 50,000 concerned, 500,000 confirmed cases. And that probably means that we're going to take at about 100 million, we'll start to see a slowdown in the disease. It's probably going to take about 100 days, I'm sorry. And to get to herd immunity, which would be about 250 million people. That's about 400 days. So this epidemic is likely to last until we either get a vaccine or we achieve herd immunity. I think both of those are likely to take 18 to 24 months. Next slide, please. And as you can see, we've spread to the entire United States. The initial outbreak tended to be in the Northeast, in New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. As we shut the country down, those have actually had very few cases. But then we had an outbreak, a resurgence in California, in Texas, throughout the Southeast, and we're now looking at a resurgence in the Midwest. Part of the issue is that this virus is very hard to control. It's very infectious. So when we had the country locked down, we had very few cases. So as we've opened it up, we've seen more cases. And we also opened it up in areas where they hadn't seen the virus. And so people were less cautious. As we've had more outbreaks, we've had more, I think we've seen some of the cases go down because I think we've had people get better with masking and social distancing. Next slide, please. And this is Pennsylvania. We've actually been fairly fortunate. We peaked at about 2,000 cases a day at the height in April. We got down as low as 200 or 300 a day in May, before we opened the state back up. And with reopening, we saw an increase to about 1,000 a day, which has also come down now to about 800 or so. What we're really seeing is the virus is here. It's pretty much at a steady, slow rate. We don't expect it to, I personally don't expect it to get a lot worse. I don't expect it to get a lot better. The clear wild card is what happens when we get to the fall, where it gets a little colder. The virus may transmit itself a little better, and also we're reopening schools. Next slide. And in Dauphin County, we're just steady. We've had about 20 cases a day since the start of the epidemic. We've seen that number hasn't gotten a lot higher, hasn't gotten a lot lower. We have occasional spikes, but we just see in this area a slow, steady rate. In a way, that's good. It's going through the population. It's giving people immunity, but it's not overwhelming the medical system. We at UPMC Pinnacle, we peaked probably May 1st with about 60 patients through our 7-hospital system. We've been at 25 to 30 for the last probably the last 2 to 3 months. Occasionally we'll get above 30, and occasionally we'll get as low as 25. It's just simply been steady. Next slide, please. And I think the reason for this is we have a lot of influence on how well this virus transmits itself. So if it's just simply without people practicing social distancing, without people wearing masks, it's actually just shy of twice as infectious as the flu. On average, about 2.5 to 3 people get infected from every person with the virus. So if you think about it, that gives it the possibility for very rapid exponential spread. In comparison, the flu is about 1.5, and some of the things that are very easily transmittable, smallpox, the common cold, are about 6. Measles, which is highly contagious, is about 14 to 15. So if we're not social distancing, if we're not wearing masks, this virus is very good at transmitting itself from person to person. Next slide, please. And what we can see is in March, before we really started doing all this, the virus was reproducing itself pretty efficiently. For every person infected, roughly 3 were infected. As we began practicing social distancing, as we began wearing masks, it actually came down fairly rapidly. And while we were in lockdown, it went to less than 1 per person. In other words, for every person infected, less than 1 person was infected by that person. In other words, we were able to shrink the number of infections. The numbers were going down. What we then saw is we reopened. The numbers went higher. They probably didn't get higher than 1.1, 1.2, but as a result, we saw an increase in cases. There have been things like shutting down bars, shutting down restaurants, and as a result, it's now probably just about 1. So for every person that's infected, on average, they infect 1 other person. As a result, the numbers aren't going up real high. aren't going up quickly and they aren't coming down quickly. What we're really seeing here is the effectiveness of social distancing, the effectiveness of wearing masks, and the effectiveness of sheltering. Next slide, please. So how does COVID actually present? So one of the things that makes it more difficult is there's a long incubation period. Symptoms can occur as quickly as 2 days, but can take as long as 2 weeks, on average 4 to 5 days. It's also very nonspecific. Fevers, cough, shortness of breath, can have a sore throat. And 2 or 3 times I've examined people, I've said, you just aren't sick enough for this disease. They were tested, they were positive. It's very easy to be fooled because it can present like a common cold. It can present like allergies. There are some uncommon symptoms. It can cause diarrhea. It can cause a loss of taste or a loss of smell. That's pretty specific for COVID. Most people who have that happen do in fact have COVID. And they're what I would describe as just weird symptoms. We've had a number of young people who've had strokes unexpectedly. They've been COVID positive. There's something called COVID toes, where the toes get really red, swollen, tender. Occurs with otherwise asymptomatic people. And in children, they have what's called the diffuse inflammatory syndrome. They present like another childhood illness called Kawasaki's disease, which gives them fevers, chills, sweats, often swollen lips, often swollen joints. And fortunately, this occurs, but it's very rare. In the hospital, we have a much higher index of suspicion when we see someone who comes in with respiratory failure. Next slide, please. And the other thing is the majority of the symptoms are mild. So roughly 80% of the people have a mild illness. They either don't have any symptoms or they just have a mild flu where they're able to stay at home. About 15% have a severe enough illness that they end up in the hospital, usually because they require oxygen. And then about 5% end up critical in the intensive care unit. Somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of those people will pass away, will die. Next slide, please. And it's clearly affected by age. There are some countries where no one under the age of 50 has died. The death rate in children, it does occur, but it's extremely rare. And up until about the age of 40 to 50, the mortality is about 0.1, 0.2%, which is roughly equivalent to the flu. From 50 to 60, it goes up to 1 to 2%. 60 to 70, it goes up to 3 to 4%. 70 to 80, it goes up to 8 to 9. And above the age of 80, it's as high as 15%. As a result, like the flu, you expect to see you have people who are older being more likely to get sick, more likely to die. When you look at the flu, roughly 10% of the people who die are below the age of 65. In this disease, it's a little more common for people who are younger to pass away. So across the country, roughly 20% of the people who have died are less than the age of 65. So it affects young people a little more than the flu. The other issue is there's just a random component. So we've had people in their 40s and 50s get just really sick. We just did somebody who was in his 40s, 2 people who were in their 40s were just discharged after surviving 3 and 4 month stays. And they had some risk factors. They were a little bit heavy. They had a little hypertension, but they weren't particularly ill or sick. There is just a random component to this disease where some people that you can't predict get sick very easily. Next slide. It does correlate with other conditions, so particularly heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and it is actually rare for people to die if they have no other medical illnesses. So like the flu, it's older, sicker people, although it affects them with a higher mortality, and it affects young people more. Next slide, please. And this is the age distribution of cases in Pennsylvania. And you can see it affects people fairly throughout all ages. There are less documented cases in younger people. It's probably because they become less symptomatic. And there are actually fewer cases in older people. Next slide, please. On the other hand, the deaths are really concentrated in the 60, 70, 80 range, At least some of that is before this was well controlled, it got into nursing homes, and we did see a fair number of deaths in nursing homes. But so again, in Pennsylvania, we've seen about 90% of the people who have died be under the age of 65. Nationally, it's about 20%. Next slide, please. Testing, and we've heard a lot about testing. The best test, we believe, is a PCR, test of the nose. It's more accurate if a good swab is obtained. If not, it isn't gotten of the nose, it's gotten of the sinuses. That hurts. And it appears to be pretty good. We've had most people who we think are positive turn positive. We have had a few people with obvious exposures test negative and then positive a week later. We think it's a fairly good test. However, it also takes a long time to resolve. We've had patients that are asymptomatic, were tested for pre-admission testing for a procedure, who have been positive 12, 13, 14 weeks. We don't, it's not totally clear, but we don't think that those patients are infectious. We think that's dead virus in their nose. But the virus will clearly hang around for a long time. The other thing is that there's a lot of interest in antibody testing. So for example, my wife had the mother of all flus in January, was short of breath walking up the stairs, and is convinced she got COVID. The problem is that the current test, which we can get, the one we can get through Quest, is not totally, it's probably about 1/2 to 1/3 wrong. So in our area, we probably have infected about 10% of the population. The test has a 3% false positive rate. So somewhere between 1/2 and 1/3 of the patients who test positive, test will be wrong. In addition, it's not totally clear either how long the immunity lasts, meaning how long it sticks around for, when can you be infected again, or how protective it is. It is controversial over whether you can get this disease twice. As a result, we don't typically recommend antibody testing. There are antigen tests available. The test that, for example, the governor of Ohio got was an antigen test, which was positive. He had a PCR, which was then negative. Typically, these come back very quickly. They're good for screening sports teams, a large population. They aren't particularly accurate. We wouldn't, for example, use them in the hospital. Next slide, please. And what is protection? Protection, right, for us is really doing things like wearing a face mask. There is a lot of good data that face masks work. So for example, there was two hairdressers, and this was in the South. They opened up their salon. They were both COVID positive. In the course of the week, they cut 100 to 200 people's hair. I think this was a hair salon, not a barbershop. So it was a longer thing. They were next to someone for half hour or an hour. They were wearing masks. Their clients were wearing masks. There wasn't a single case of COVID being transmitted. Face masks will prevent you from getting the disease. The cloth masks are clearly better at protecting other people from you. The surgical masks are clearly both good at protecting you from other people. So I really will not go out to anything in public without wearing the face mask. They work, they're inconvenient. I hate mine. They get hot, they're uncomfortable, but they work. If we could get people to wear the face masks, we would see much less disease. And in fact, if we get people to religiously wear them, we'd probably see the numbers go down to the point where we could really easily reopen schools and reopen businesses. There is some use of eye protection. The issue with eye protection is I think it helps. For example, I always wear goggles if I go into a COVID room. On the other hand, I think it's not as, for just walking around, for going outside, I don't typically use it. Frequent hand washing clearly works, although the flu, for example, is often transmitted by surfaces. This disease probably is airborne more frequently. And clearly outdoors is less risky than indoors. So if you're meeting people, meeting them outdoors, where the air isn't stuck in a room, where the wind will blow it away, where it can just simply diffuse up off to the sky, clearly is much less risky. Okay, next slide, please. We do have much better treatments, and nationally, we've seen the mortality decrease. When this first started, according to the website Infection 2020, we probably had a 5% mortality. Now it's probably down to 3%. I think that's a result of two things. A drug called dexamethasone, simple steroids, which decreases mortality in mild disease, anyone who needs an oxygen, by about 20%. Severe disease, anyone who ends up in the ICU, by about 30%. We have a drug that's in very short supply called remdesivir, which clearly decreases length of stay. We've had very good results using the two, remdesivir and dexamethasone, together. There's clearly we clearly have decreased mortality. Some of that, I'm sure, is the dexamethasone. Some of that is the remdesivir. Some of that is simple, better ICU care. We're better at keeping patients with COVID alive until, sometimes I think, until the virus just decides to go away. We also have available convalescent plasma, although I think I've had mixed experience with it. And there's a lot of publicity about hydroxychloroquine. There are 4 separate studies that suggest it doesn't work in outpatients, in patients with mild disease who are hospitalized, in patients with severe disease who are hospitalized, and as prophylaxis. We initially used it. We came to the conclusion it didn't work. We haven't used it for several months. But again, there are other things that seem to work much better. Next slide, please. So, immunity. Now, clearly what the way out of this is if we get herd immunity. So, patients who are infected clearly develop immunity, although it's not clear for how long. We had a patient a resident who was donating convalescent plasma. She had mild disease, and her levels went down to the point where she couldn't donate after about 3 months. It is clear that people with mild disease develop less antibodies. Herd immunity is clearly a way out of this. In order to slow this virus down, we have to go from around 50 million people infected to about 100 million. The current rate, that's about 100 days. And we have to go from, in order to have real, true herd immunity, we have to go from 50 million to around 275 million. That's in the 400-day range. It is, however, clear that if this virus, it seems to me that the virus, even if we don't have full immunity, it's likely to become much less severe. So, for example, the flu outbreak of 1968, which killed 1 million Americans, that virus is still around. It's covered by the flu shot. We all have partial immunity, and it's a more severe disease. Instead of killing 10,000 people during an average flu season, it kills 30,000, but it has really become much more like the flu. What I expect to happen with this disease is as we get a vaccine, as we have more and more people who've been exposed, we're going to see much less severe disease. I do think that this will become something that is closer to the flu once it's been around several seasons. Next slide, please. They're clearly, one of the ways out is a vaccine. There are currently several vaccines that are in phase 3 trials. They were tested on 50 to 100 people, gave good antibody responses, seem to be safe, and are now being tested on 30 to 50,000. We're tested both to see if they work and if they're safe. Dr. Fauci says he doesn't believe they're going to be really effective, 95% like a measles vaccine. They're likely to be 50% like a flu vaccine, but that will slow down the epidemic. If we get really lucky, these will be available in the late winter, either late 2020 or early 2021, but this is a logistical nightmare. Most of these vaccines require 2 doses. So in order to vaccinate the country, we're going to need 600 million doses, and to vaccinate the world, we're probably going to be about 15 million. Clearly, it was not going to be able to ramp up production where everyone gets it immediately. There's clearly going to be giving it to higher risk people. probably nursing home residents, probably frontline providers, and probably kids in school. Next slide. Oh, that's a duplicate slide. I'm sorry. Next slide. So conclusion. We are seeing this virus increase nationally. We're getting about 50,000 new cases a day. There are certain hotspots, particularly the South. We probably will see hotspots in the Midwest. Fortunately, it's increasing slowly. In Pennsylvania, we're seeing 800 cases a day. And in our area, it's just very steady at a low level, about 20. Clearly, I believe social distancing, particularly masks, have increased the infection rate. I think treatment has improved. And I also think this is about to be with us from 18 to 24 months until we either get a vaccine or until we get herd immunity. Okay, that ends my presentation. I believe there's several questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's give a hand to Dr. Goldman. This was a great presentation, and we so appreciate your expertise here. We do have 5 questions in queue, and we'll cover them as quickly as we can.
Certainly.
First, Dr. Goldman, what are your recommendations for young children, elementary school age, who may be going back to in-person schools in the next few weeks, as
So
they may be too young to follow the hand washing and masking requirements effectively?
So I think this is a difficult problem because we are trying to balance the benefits of in-person learning, and I think those are great, with the risks. So a few things. First of all, the good news is that those kids are unlikely to get very sick. Most kids have pretty asymptomatic infections. The bad news is they're likely to get, if they're still infectious, so you have to be careful with their parents. You particularly have to be careful with their grandparents. If possible, have them wear a mask. Now, I remember how my kids were. I don't know that that's realistic. As much mask wearing as they can get, as much hand washing as they can get. And I think it requires some hard thoughts and some hard decisions. They clearly can't go to school if they're sick. You have to be careful if anyone in their class has gotten COVID. And we also, you probably have to be very careful about the grandparents. If you have 70, 80-year-old grandparents, it's probably not a good idea to have them in close contact with the grandchildren when they could get while they're at school, because there's such a high rate of asymptomatic infection. And I would go as far as to say, if you have 70, 80-year-old kids and grandkids are in school, either don't have them see them or have them wash their hands, wear a mask when they're together. Clearly, kids who are at higher risk if they have other underlying conditions. The good news is we've had this virus go through many other countries, and even kids with underlying conditions have gotten sick. There have been some kids in this country who have died, but it's very rare. So even kids with underlying conditions are likely to have a less aggressive disease.
Thank you. Second question, are exposure to sunshine, vitamin D, and copper favorable to supporting the immune system where corona is either not caught or minimal symptoms? Some hospitals have incorporated copper in fixtures, et cetera, and lowered hospital infection rates significantly.
So there is speculation that vitamin D deficiency makes a more severe disease. I had mine level checked. Mine was low, and so I'm taking supplementary vitamin D. There isn't a lot of good evidence, but vitamin D is pretty unlikely to hurt you. Having a lot of us are vitamin D insufficient, and so I think that it's a pretty harmless way of possibly decreasing your chances of getting very sick. There isn't a lot of good evidence on it. Mm-hmm. Ultraviolet light clearly kills the virus, and so there was hope that as summer came around, we would see less disease. That hasn't come to bear. And copper is used a lot of places. I haven't seen it, good data on it with COVID. So I'm going to have to say I don't know on that one.
Thank you. Third question here. Why doesn't Pennsylvania have free on-demand COVID testing as do other states like New York? Why can't we get a better turnaround on COVID tests in Pennsylvania?
This is a national problem. So I think we should. I think we should have enough capability that you could get it back within 1 to 2 to 3 days. Unfortunately, there's such a demand for testing, and there's a shortage of reagents. Quest, which does a lot of the tests in this area, actually had to delay their time. And it's a simple, I don't know if it's a simple matter, but it's a matter of how much testing capacity people have, what the availability of the reagents is. And in fact, I mean, we've really ramped up testing in this country, but our demands have exceeded our capacity. And if I had a solution to that, I would, we wouldn't have these delays.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Next question, and boy, the questions are, lining up here. So we'll get as many in as we can. In listening to a few epidemiologists lately, I understand that COVID-19 is likely to be epidemic. That is with us for a long time and well past a vaccine. I'm curious of what you think of this rather sobering comment as compared to smallpox, which we eradicated.
I think that they're correct, but I think it's an oversimplification to think that we're going to be living like this for years to come. Usually, the natural history of a new virus is it goes through the population. We either get full or partial immunity to it. And two things happen. One, it transmits itself less efficiently. If you're partially immune, the virus isn't as infectious. And two, people become less sick. Again, the best analogy I have is to an epidemic flu. When a new flu appears, the first season to 2 seasons, it spreads quickly. It kills a lot of people, puts a lot of people in hospitals. But as you get partial immunity, it slows down and it becomes less lethal. I kind of expect that this will, 5 years from now, still be with us. It will be more like the flu, where it happens, particularly during respiratory season, but the mortality and the hospitalization rate are much lower than it is now. Especially if we have a vaccine, it won't require the kind of social distancing that we need now.
Great. Yes. Thank you. So second to last question here,
Okay.
or third to last, I guess. If a child has an underlying condition such as a heart defect, are they at greater risk for returning to school?
They are clearly at greater risk for returning to school because in all places, in all countries, people with underlying conditions have a higher mortality. On the other hand, when this went through China, when this went through Italy, there wasn't a high death rate among children. And in all of those countries, there are kids with underlying defects. So they are clearly at higher risk than other children. I don't think that they are at the same risk as adults.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're at a lower risk.
Right. When you give dates for durations, is that from now or from the start of COVID?
I would say 24 months from the start, 18 months from now.
Okay.
And you have to remember, what's Yogi Bear's line? It's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So these are all just guesses. My guess is 18 months from now.
Right, right. The medical community may want to label asymptomatic to lay people as infected with no apparent symptoms, so young people and others understand the importance more. Is that kind of a question, I guess?
You know what? Try to convince a 20-some-year-old that they aren't invincible. So I agree, but I think people know that they are at risk. But I think that, from personal experience, when you're younger, you're willing to take more risks. You think things aren't going to infect you. And so I think we should be labeling it as infected without a lot of symptoms, contagious without a lot of symptoms. But man, if I could figure out how to get my kids not to do, stupid things, I can't imagine it's easier with my kids than other people.
Right. So, my fellow Rotarians, we are pushing time here today. We have time for one more question. With long delays in getting test results going to national labs, why are we not pursuing more local test analysis? What are the components of, just talk a little bit on that.
So that's a great question. And in fact, at Pinnacle, we have what's called a Cepheid machine. We can, for our own patients, turn it around in about 4 hours. The problem is we don't have enough cartridges for the Cepheid machine. So if it was a simple matter of buying the machine and just saying to the company, why don't you give us enough cartridges so that we can run as many as we need, we would do that. The problem is that the cartridges are often in shortage. And in fact, UPMC took a 3D printer and made its own cartridges. We still have limited capacity because of the shortages of the parts. If it was a simple matter of buying more machines, we would buy them. The problem is you can buy the machines, but not have the parts for them that allows you to ramp up testing.
Thank you. Rotary Club of Harrisburg, let's again give a great thank you to Dr. Goldman.
Thank you.
We just thank you so much for your presentation. It's tough to really adequately thank someone on Zoom like this, but I hope you feel the appreciation. Again, make sure you get your address over to Adeline so we can send you a nice thank you gift for being our speaker here today. And thank you again to UPMC for making this kind of presentation possible. We so appreciate your support. We are doing Zoom meetings. So next week, our meeting on Monday, August 17, will be by Zoom. We'll have Lenwood Sloan presenting, just talking about a gathering at the crossroad, which is all about the monument in Harrisburg that commemorates Harrisburg history. And the week after that, we will be hearing about leading the workforce beyond COVID-19. And there we'll have a woman who is a senior vice president of human relations at Sheets. These are going to be great presentations. Don't miss a meeting. Show up tonight for the service event. We're up to 20 people now. Guys, we appreciate you. We appreciate all that you do to make this club and our community a better place in the world. Have a great Rotary week.